Hello, I'm Mischievous Marcinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, and all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals. Amongst other comics, I own many other comics, Dan, including complete runs of things. But the point of the matter is the annuals for Amazing Spider-Man do not count. Even those other comics do not count. It's all about Amazing Spider-Man and Amazing Fantasy 15.
Well, I'm Dapper Dan Gavazin, and I too own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I have historically said count and still stick with it, perhaps stubbornly. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15, which is not a part of an Amazing Spider-Man collection, but nevertheless probably trumps most Spider-Man collections, remains a fantasy to own.
That's amazing, Dan. And Dan, it's also worth noting that I got a PS5 over the weekend, and I bought Spider-Man 2, and you immediately were like, you have to play Spider-Man 1 and Miles Morales before you play Spider-Man 2. So then I went out and bought Spider-Man 1 and Miles Morales. So I own the complete set of Spider-Man games for PS5. They all count, apparently. I don't know where I was going with this, but I just wanted to point that out to you, Dan.
You're patting yourself on the back for 7-year-old games.
I'm patting myself on the back, but I'm also padding my stats in terms of all of the completeness and things that count, right?
All right. Well, let me know when you have platinum trophies and all of those, and then then we'll talk. Okay.
I may not. The way I play modern video games, I'm not going to try and compete on that level. But anyway, welcome to Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for the 8 Deaths of Spider Talk.
Boy, reading this comic, I really felt all 8 of those deaths. If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. With the way that Apple Podcasts has been changing their algorithm, we need all of those reviews. They really help people find the show, so we really appreciate it if you could leave some for us.
I'm going to use a read of Ragador every time you talk about Apple Podcasts and how it's just destroying our podcast, Dan. But this podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes and exclusive artwork and keep this podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon. On the Patreon, we've already kicked off Season 7 of the Amazing Spider Talk, where the first 4 episodes of that season are already available. So if you want to join our conversation about the David Michelinie era of Spider-Man, consider joining the Patreon.
Yeah, we were expecting to do a 5th one, but I got very sick, and that had to kind of been passed on. So pretty soon there will be 5 in there. Just stay patient. But today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 67. This issue was written by Justina Ireland, although she asked to have her name removed from it. No, I'm joking. The covers features...
It's like, wait, what?
The cover features artwork by Patrick Gleason and Richard Isanove. The interior pages feature artwork by Andrea Broccardo, colors by Marcio Menyz, and of course, letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue was first released on February 12th, 2025. Let's start off with Peter Parker in our discussion of this issue.
I mean, we can, but does the comic want to talk about Peter Parker?
Fair enough. At least we have our priorities straight, Mark. I liked issue 65. I will continue to stand by my like of that twist for the character into nihilism in that issue. I thought it was an interesting avenue to go down, and even the last issue that I didn't love, at least put us in Peter's mind for part of it and evolved it in some way, watching him try to get help, right? In this book, we've officially outstayed the welcome of this plot line, and it's not even resolved here. It's going to continue into the next issue for whatever role Peter Parker has to play in it. And that's not to say you can't make a change, in Peter and have it stay for a little bit, but you got to do something with it. And having a character surrender to nihilism and therefore do nothing in his own comic is only as interesting as you're able to mine out of it, because otherwise he's just sitting around. And we have entered sitting around phase in this comic with this issue.
Yeah, well, frankly, it's also reflective of the fact that, the things that he's sitting around and not reacting to, even though they're being painted as potentially high stakes, they're really not, which basically means for the last 3 issues, Dan, nothing of consequence has happened in this comic, which is very problematic when you have this 10-part story that, is supposed to be about Peter dying and coming back and fighting this world-ending threat. Like, where is the urgency to tell the story? I mean, like, frankly, like, I mean, that's why I was joking in the recap, like, with the Calyx attacking Feast, I am going to have to assume that is going to be, watching his friends and family get, threatened with death is going to be what pulls Peter out of his funk. Maybe, I mean, maybe he's just going to let them die because what else? Whatever. But I'm making a leap of faith here. But the fact of the matter is, like, we haven't had anything truly of consequence to move the needle outside of Doctor Strange showing up and be like, no, this is important. I swear, you got to listen to me. I'm going to tell you anyway, reader/Peter.
Yeah, and Peter, the meta commentary is thick in this. The sort of like pass unsubscribe of it all, I think, is how a lot of people are feeling about this story at this point, which is a shame because, like, I felt like I was won over by this story eventually. Like, was it going to be the most important Spider-Man story of all time? No, but like these fun diversions from the norm, if done sparingly, can give us something thoughtful and interesting. And it's what we're asking for, is to not repeat the stories of the past. This is doing something new, ostensibly. And I'm always asking for that. And we just got some preview tease about Gwen Stacy being, dug up from her grave and potentially being brought back from the dead. And like, I kind of had a bit of a meltdown on Blue Sky about it. And it's not even
and I made fun of you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's not even about the sort of like, it's
not the story itself.
It's untouchable thing, right? And I don't know what's going to happen in the story, but it's the
Sure.
very fixation on these stories of the past that I think has really dogged Amazing Spider-Man. It's so backwards looking. It's how do we spend a whole run doing nothing but retcon, and maybe there's something new to Gwen, but I would much rather them just move on and tell something completely original and new in the realm of Spider-Man. And yeah, we're going to get those classic stories, the characters coming back and stuff like that every now and again. But I'd much rather a big, bold swing like this if it was constructed as well as I'd like it to be constructed.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, like, look, I'm not going to litigate the solicits for the Gwen Stacy story, but like, I mean, personally speaking, the past doesn't bother me as much. Like, what was bothering me about the first few issues of this 8 Deaths of Spider-Man was like, I feel like it was like too in the navel of the mythology of it all, which just didn't make sense to me from a Spider-Man standpoint. And what I felt was kind of pulling this story out of the muck was like, this and it started with the Justina Ireland issues, which interestingly enough was this kind of like refocusing of like, the mythology is not important. It's more about what's Peter doing within this status quo and how this relates to him, and it was going in that direction for a couple of issues, but like this was my fear, Dan, frankly. Like, I know you liked that nihilism story a lot, and I less so. And this is not like an "I told you so" moment. Trust me, because like I was,
but
like,
the
well, let me see
nihilism
where
was
this
still
goes.
very Peter oriented.
It was Peter oriented, but my fear was that it was going to use this as an excuse to kind of disengage Peter from the story and go back to the mythology, which is what it's done. Because now we're back to caskets and blights and all this utter nonsense in the X-Men and Juggernaut, and he's related to the Scions somehow. And like, I don't care about any of this. Like, I'm at the point, like, yes, the nihilism switch, if you will, had potential to be interesting, but like, I'm like, okay, like, we are like so far past like getting to the fireworks factory now. Like, just do something with this story. Like, we're not doing anything. Like, we're just so obsessed with doing nothing but pretending that it's something. And like, if you want to bring back Gwen Stacy and do something about it, I'm all ears, but like my guess is it's probably going to be similar to this, where we're going to bring her back and do nothing about it or do something ridiculous about it. And that is the biggest issue with the Spider-Man books right now, you know, and it is this like complete paralysis to actually tell a story in a way that goes somewhere. Like no one wants to actually, you know, like, I don't know if it's a mandate or just poor oversight or people just thinking, no, this is how it's done now in comics. We don't actually go anywhere. But like, I feel like we don't actually progress in any meaningful way in a story anymore. And that's where we've hit in this story as well. Like, we're not going anywhere. Like, what are there? Three chapters left at this point?
And I point deaths.
And a point deaths.
Deaths,
so,
yeah.
So like, what are we honestly going to accomplish in these comics at this point? I just don't see it being something meaningful that actually advances Peter's narrative in some kind of major way.
Well, they're going to defeat the Blight, Mark. Something you didn't know that you cared about, and now are being told you should care about.
Yes, because Doctor Strange said so.
Yeah, and of the things we should care about, like, it's Peter and his supporting cast. And, like, they're not handled well here either. Like,
no.
Look, I don't want to be a prude about Peter sleeping with Felicia, but, like, what do you want to do with this character? Because you've created this great Shay character that, like, okay, needs some fleshing out. We need to know what's in it for her. But at least she's got some kind of spine and backbone, and she's, you know, challenging Peter in interesting new ways. And you've put in the work to make that vaguely intriguing in a way that, like, a love interest hasn't been for Peter in a bit of time. And, like, okay, like, they're not, like, official, or maybe they're not, like, you know, engaged or whatever.
Exclusive,
so we can go
or
and
whatever.
sleep around.
Yeah.
But are we supposed to like Peter after that? Like if he goes back to Shay after this, it's like, I don't know. I mean, I guess I won't, like, you know, people do this kind of stuff, and maybe I'm just prudish and ultra monogamous, but, like, Peter's never been this kind of guy, and it makes me, like, doubt the investment in Shay altogether.
Right. Well, I was actually originally thinking about cracking a joke in my recap instead of, you know, it doesn't count if you don't care. I was going to crack a joke about, like, oh, we're revisiting the Marv Wolfman run where, like, Peter, like, started to, like, mack it to Betty Brant even though she was married. But, like, at least then he had just been dumped by Mary Jane. So, like, you know, he was kind of you know, on the rebound and feeling a little desperate and hurt maybe. But yeah, this makes, like, zero sense. And, like, it's not about being a prude or not prude. It's just not a likable turn for Peter, especially since, like, you know, there was no indicate. Like, look, like, Shay was nice and all, but if, like, they used this as an opportunity to kind of, like, build on Peter wanting to rekindle something with Felicia because, like, she's filling a void that he can't otherwise have right now. Then I could be like, all right, well, maybe, you know, maybe not the way I would have recommended going there, but okay, like, there's something here. But it's very clearly being set up that it's just sex, and even that is not enough to move the needle for Peter because he's in this, like, nihilistic, you know, void right now. So it's like, so you spurred this person that you might have had a potential relationship with, and then, like, just had meaningless sex with this other person that you know is an important person in your life. Like, why am I supposed to like this character? Yeah,
I mean, it's just pure humanism.
I'm sure the internet is going to make fun of me for saying that, but, like, why am I supposed to like Peter for this? Because I don't get it.
I mean, I think the point is it's supposed to be an extension of this kind of hedonistic, like, you know, like, nobody can be hurt by me kind of thing. Which, like, fine, like, you know, if you really want to go into the sort of, like, ego of it all, and I'm the only thing that matters, and so let me just take care of me, like, fine. But, like, I think this is too loaded to, like, lean into. But also I have questions about, like, I mean, look, we are far past asking, like, what is the age of the reader of this comic? You know, like, it's a very violent comic. It deals with sex and sex jokes and things like that. But, like, anytime it, like, really leans into that stuff, like, again, I'm not a prude, but, like, I think about, like when I got into these comics when I was, like, 8, 9, 10, you know, and, like, it's subtle enough here. It's not, like, waving it in your face, and I probably wouldn't have gotten it at that age, you know, but, like, I just don't think it's necessary. You know, like if you want to play with the whole closing the door thing, that's at least artfully done. I just think that this is a little too like on the nose about it all. But again, I'm going to be called a prude or whatever. And I didn't like this turn. But then you've got the supporting cast.
Don't read the YouTube comments, Dan.
I know. I know. But then you got the supporting cast that are just like, they don't exist when they're not on screen with Peter, because clearly they're all just hanging out at Feast.
They all go to Feast.
What is this world?
But like this has been this comic from the get-go of the storyline. Like I cracked a few previous jokes about it. I mean, like, I appreciate that like Joe Kelly and Justina Ireland are like trying to integrate the quote unquote supporting cast, but it was like very clear, like, for this story, for these 10 issues, the supporting cast is Aunt May, Randy, and Shay, and then I guess who's this new cat? Ricardo. I you know, we got a new wrinkle here, but like, you know, like when I think back to the successful periods of Spider-Man comics and the supporting cast, which I have said many times, and I know you share in this opinion, is I think the best supporting cast in comics, you know, it's about kind of like jumping around and floating around. You very rarely, like for an entire arc, like we're only gonna fixate on these three people. It's gonna be Robbie, Jonah, and MJ, or you know, Flash, Harry, and I mean, like, it moves around because that is life, you know, like the other characters don't cease to exist because we're, you know, one storyline is following another one a little more intently, you know, but like it's just lazy storytelling in my opinion, because we're like, well, you know, no, we really want to use like Randy, Aunt May, and Shay here as kind of the linchpins, but we don't know how to tell other stories within this story. And then even with them, we're just going to like throw them all in like the same locations as often as we can, because we can't bother to actually, you know, tell an intelligent story that would put them at different places that would still have an impact on the overall narrative here. I mean, like it's just sloppy and lazy. I hate to be so derisive about it, but that's what it is. I don't know how else you can describe it.
My only pushback to that will be that like the JMS era, the only supporting cast characters were MJ and Aunt May. And I think that was fine, although felt a little bit vacant, you know, of the other characters. And like, frankly, these are the only normal people left in Peter's life, you know, like everyone else is a super powered character, you know?
Or goes to Secret Identity or whatever, you know?
And I'll also throw like Spider-Boy into the mix, because he's been circulating around this book during this arc. You know, I'm not the biggest fan of the character, despite finding his title fun to read. Right. But like, he is there. Right. So let's talk about the other team that's involved here. And that's
I was going to say, I mean, I was saying, you know, the supporting cast, and how could I be remiss in mentioning the long-standing stalwart members of Spider-Man's supporting cast, the X-Men.
It's not just Kamala Harris, Kamala Khan this time. Yeah, look at me mixing that up. All right. So the X-Men, what do you think about how they were portrayed in this book?
I mean, you know, pass, do not subscribe. I mean, is that what the kids are saying these days? I mean, look, I don't mind other characters, other heroes being involved, but like this really feels shoehorned in right now. That's just my largest complaint. Like I you know, it's really just like, we want the X-Men in it. Okay. And like, I don't know, like, I got criticized already, you know, a few months ago for not reading, you know, House of X and Powers of X, but like, you know, for the fact of the matter is, I can't for the life of me identify, is this what these characters should be? But like, I do know enough to know that Juggernaut probably doesn't talk about the shutting people's pie holes up. So that's the other thing. So it's like, okay, so we got these characters that I really don't care about, and it seems like it's probably not the most faithful adaptation of it, but maybe I'm wrong on that one. What did you think?
I thought they were decent. I mean, that line stood out as like a really silly one, and I don't know enough about Juggernaut one way or the other to tell you like, is that kind of insult in his vernacular? It sounded out of character to me. But I thought, like, you know, in terms of bringing the X-Men in, there was a fine showcase of their powers and how they like all work together as a team. And I thought like Cyclops' voice was right. Like, you know, Justina Ireland can write, you know, a solid team up book here. So like, that's fine, but I don't want them to be the main thrust of this comic. It should be about Peter Parker. And this feels like a Nick Lowe, you know, getting to like play with the X-Men again and having them make this incorporated. But even then, I feel like there are some basic mistakes made here. Like, look, I know the Juggernaut possesses the Crimson Gem of Sidorak. It's something I've known for a long time.
I don't know, but sure, yeah. I believe you.
Yeah, I mean, like, it
sounds great.
It was featured in the 90s show, and like, you know, as a kid, X-Men was all the rage in the 90s, and so that was some bit of information that I picked up. How I picked that up?
Clearly, the problem with me, Dan, is I just have not consumed enough 90s X-Men, or 2000s or 2010s or 2020s X-Men. So there you go. I've read all the John Byrne and Chris Claremont run, and you know, I even the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby stuff. But you know,
I've read everything but the Claremont run at this point. Okay. I don't know why. Right. It's like such a commitment that like I haven't.
I love the Claremont run. It's so good. But
I'm sure it's brilliant, and I'm doing this all wrong. I have been binging X-Men for the past few years just to get up on that universe. And for whatever reason, like I'm like, I know the Claremont run's brilliant, and it's gonna take all of my attention for years to read through it. And but anyway, I picked up the knowledge that Juggernaut is powered by the Crimson Gem of Sidorak. Okay,
thank goodness one of us knows.
Okay, but I would hardly count that, and you're a great example, as knowledge a generic or even hardcore Spider-Man reader should know. And you're a hardcore Marvel reader. So like, you know, like.
Except for House of X and Power of X.
Okay, great. Yes. And you're working on it. You're working on it.
All right. I'm working on it.
Yeah. But like, why not, like, of all of the editor's notes that we get, why not point out that connection or have the writer incorporate that connection into the script? Because if you didn't know that, you would have no idea why these guys suddenly showed up. And it feels like a real missing beat. So anyway, I mean, I don't mean to make a whole diatribe about an editor's note, but like, that's the kind of thing you do to tighten something like this and make sure everyone can come along for the ride. Also, I don't know I continue to be confused about the rules of the Covenant. But like, they beat Kratos in this, the next Scion, and he yields. But like, what does that mean? Does it matter? Like, does that continue this contest? Maybe I'm meant to be confused and to ask, is this thing all up in the air right now?
Right.
Yeah, it's just another.
Like, what was the point of Doom picking Spider-Man if the X-Men can just do the fight? But then,
right, like, call on the Avengers.
Yeah, like, I don't know, man. But then Calyx like just flips the board anyway. So none of this makes sense, Dan.
Yeah. Okay, so before we because the second half of the show, just a preview, is going to be us ranting about the Blight and how the story is falling apart in the third act. So before we get there, let's talk about the artwork in this, which I felt like it's not ugly artwork, it's not bad artwork, but it feels like a rushed fill-in this issue, especially compared to even last issue's art from Broccardo, which was better than this.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that on its face, but like, you know, it's a little alarming to me that you know, clearly we like planned this storyline out as some kind of like bridge to, I guess, the Joe Kelly solo run or whatever, but like, it just, you know, everything about this kind of feels like, you know, the last 6 to 8 months of the Nick Spencer run, where it was like, you take a turn and you take a turn and let's get 3 inkers and let's do this and let's do that. And like, I don't know, like, you're telling me with like this like very specialized 10-point story, like a 10-part story, you just couldn't get like McGinnis to do the bulk of it and, you know, maybe have 1 or 2 fill-ins, but like, that's not what we're doing here. It's just like a freaking carousel of artists and inkers right now. And, you know, not having a consistent visual style is hurting the book. I mean, more so than the story itself is hurting it too, or I should say in tandem with the story itself. I mean, like it goes together right now.
Yeah, that's what I don't understand. And then you've got like real talent like Mark Buckingham and Kev Walker doing the .1 issues in this run,
Right.
and like maybe it's a chance to have them do their own thing in a thing separate from it. But like, why would you bury talent like that? Like when you're doing something like this, I don't understand. Like,
I mean, like I wouldn't see it be buried if it well. No, I mean, you're right. It is burying when that is the only thing they're doing. But that's the thing. Like, just pick a couple and let it be consistent throughout. Like I said, let it be one or two artists that are doing this whole thing, and maybe Buckingham does and Ken Walker do the 2.1s, but like what's his face does the rest.
McGinnis.
I mean, look, I can't speak for the scheduling of these people I know, and I get the sense that McGinnis is not one for speed necessarily, but then I don't know, then don't put him on the book in the first place. I don't know, like I just like I don't get the decision making when it comes to the art on Amazing Spider-Man when we get to these like transition periods. Like they really like want to like sell the fact that this is a transition period in every conceivable way, and I feel like they should be doing the opposite. It's like, treat these as special events where you're just putting like top talent and making sure that it's carefully done. And, maybe it doesn't have to be this book wasn't every 2 weeks. This was 3 weeks. And then we're getting 2 books back to back, or 3 books if you count the .1. It's like, what is even the scheduling of this book? Like schedule this out so that we get real, like, on, consistent artwork throughout, instead of just like rushing these things together to, I don't know, get to 1,000 at some magical date, I guess is what the end game is here.
Well, I mean, it's appropriate that we're covering that transition into the David Michelinie run, because like that to me, like, whether you like Mad Dog Ward or, any of that stuff, like that was a cohesive, thing. Like whether those stories fit together, at least the stories got to exist with an art and writer pairing that saw it through during the transition and allowed some experimentation. Yeah. So,
Mike
I
Zeck
think,
did all of Craven's Last Hunt, and anyway, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like, in terms of this artwork, like I think the thing that lets it down is like there's several points where the art is not communicating the story very well. Like there's a scene where like Juggernaut is running to attack, Sirius, and it looks like he's facing the wrong way. Like there's a scene where like Doctor Strange is like all up in Peter's face, like they're gonna kiss, but the lettering is all bolded like he's yelling, but the artwork, he looks just like he's giving him like a look in the eyes, like Sidorak, like I get that he doesn't move, but like there's so many panels that are just repeating the same imagery, or like repeating of similar action just from a slightly different angle instead of like highlighting another beat in the story. And so it's like, it's professional, but it's not exciting. And like, it doesn't like tell the story in like in a really like devoted comics like oriented way. And it's passable, but like, why make passable unless it's like truly crunch? And this felt like crunch.
Right. Well, like I said, I mean, we're trying to sell this story as some kind of special event within the realm of Spider-Man, and yet we're treating it as if it's like, the second story of an annual in terms of like trying to put something together at the last. Well, I shouldn't even say that, because like I think like those are at least like evergreen house stories that are like have been sitting around. I like it just doesn't make sense to me. And all of we're gonna really lean into it in the second half of this episode, but all of this just reeks of an editorial office that has no control over the product and is just trying to pump out comics to get to a milestone number, and it's frustrating. I mean, it is a complete disservice to the readers at the end of the day.
And it's gone so far that Mark is praising annuals on the show. So, like let's put a pin in that. But in the meantime, Mark, why don't you tell people where they can join our community of fans on the internet?
Absolutely, Dan. Well, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join. and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, what's been going on in the Slack this week? I've been browsing, I've been lurking, I haven't been posting as much, but I'm more involved than I used to be, Dan. That's all I can say about the Slack.
Yeah, look, we appreciate having you there, Mark. As the rest of the internet melts down and the other sites become controlled by our oligarchs, which is a word I like to fit into the show once per week. But yeah, I mean, the Slack's been a great place. I mean, there is a lot of frustration with this story that is bubbling up there right now, and the Gwen announcement, was pretty heated battle in the Slack of people not knowing how they felt about it and all of that stuff. So I want to highlight something positive that's been going on, and it may not entirely be Slack related, but it's definitely Patreon related, and it's gotten some good discussions going in the Slack, which is we're starting to do a lot more series on the Patreon that are going to only ever remain exclusive to the Patreon. This past few weeks, we've been getting the dumps on Disney Plus, or maybe the releases on Disney Plus is a better way of saying it, of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. And our video editor, Alex Galucki, and I have been reviewing that show exclusively on the Patreon for every new episode that comes out. And it's going to be concluding next week. And we are really digging it. Mark, are you watching this show at all?
I got through the first 2 dumps. I have not watched or whatever you want to call
releases.
It. Releases.
Movements.
It's like the voting dumps that came in Atlanta at midnight. Anyway, no, I was 5 episodes in. I am okay with it. I don't love it, but I'm sure you and Alex are doing a wonderful job talking about it, and I do intend to get on a kind of like a full season recap with you guys at some point if you'll allow it. We'd love to. I don't want to step on any toes here, but
Yeah, no, we'd love to have you in there. I think episodes 6 through 8 might change your mind. I think it gets immeasurably better.
Cool.
So that's kind of where Alex and I kind of decided, we actually really like the show more than we were prior. So I'll be encouraged to hear what you think about those latest episodes. And then I've also started a new kind of diary series that I've been doing. I made an announcement on that show, and some people maybe have heard it here, that I'm writing a book about Spider-Man. And I've never really formally said any much about it on the show. And I've been working on it for about a year now. And, there's some big developments coming. But as part of that, I was doing some research and got to go to the Library of Congress to go see the original art pages for Amazing Fantasy 15. And I did a whole diary entry of talking about what my book will be and my experience of going to DC and seeing those pages. And then I did a whole interview with Sarah Duke, who is the curator of, that section of the Library of Congress, for my book. So, these are I plan on doing these fairly regularly because I'll be doing a lot of interviews with various people for my book. And, they're not really interviews that could necessarily fit with the format of our show. They're very oriented around the topic that I want to talk about for the book. And so I thought, well, rather than just sit in obscurity, I'll release them in this platform and give a diary behind the scenes of what's going on with the book, how it's developing, and take people through the process of writing a book, if that's something that you're interested in, and about me learning more about Spider-Man. So I've been talking about that in the Slack and sharing those episodes on Patreon, and people have had a really positive response to it. So come check out the Slack, go sign up for the Patreon, and get both of those series as part of a standard Patreon subscription. And you're getting a ton of additional content every week, from the show that's beyond what Mark and I already do on our packed schedule for what we're doing here. So, there's a link to the Slack and the Patreon in the description of this episode. We hope you consider supporting us.
Awesome. All right, Dan. Let's talk about the Blight.
Do we have to? As I will repeat, Peter, do we have to?
I mean, look, it is important. The blight is mysterious but important.
I mean,
for all you Severance fans out there.
You hit it up in your recap, which is to say meta commentary that doesn't mean to be meta commentary. I mean, I have 3 quotes right here that like sum up my feelings about this section of the book, which is, Peter saying to Doctor Strange, "Aren't you tired of telling me the same thing over and over?" Yes. Peter says to Doctor Strange, "Pass, unsubscribe." Yes. And then he says to him, or then Doctor Strange says to Peter, "Whether you like it or not, you will hear what I have to say about the blight." And yes, I feel that. I would like to not hear about it.
I mean, if you have to write that into your story, that's something a little problematic in my mind, but whatever.
It's like the caveat of all caveats before you get an exposition dump.
Yeah, it's like, look, guys, I know you really don't want to hear this, but seriously, you need to hear this. And I mean, this is, look, we made fun of it a bit in the last issue of this story, but like I don't even know what to do with this, Dan, because it's like, when we started this journey 4, 5, 6 issues ago, whatever it was, it was like, oh, it's this covenant and there are these scions and if Peter can't beat them all before dying 8 times, the world is over. And now it's like, yeah, but then there's blight. And it's just like, what?
Oh, yeah, so and that covenant doesn't work the way you think it works.
Yeah, and I'm just like, so what are the stakes here? And, like, who's the villain? And, like, what is this? Like, I'm both being exasperated, Dan, but I'm also, like, legitimately, like, can you explain this to me, Dan? Like, can you get to your conspiracy board and lay this out? Because, like, this makes no sense. Like, why am I supposed to care about any of this now?
Okay, so
am I nihilist?
I'm going to say two things here. 2 separate things. One is I can answer your question, what is going on here? Now, I originally read this comic and had the same feeling as you, which was like, and I'm going to read my notes that I wrote in our notes, like verbatim. This is what I wrote in full caps. "I have no fucking clue what this means and why I should care. Mark, I have witnessed the death of 10 years of Spider-Man stories under this editorial leadership, and I've become just as cynical and nihilistic as Peter Parker." And that's how I felt. Like, I just was really, like, this to me was like a low point since the end of the Nick Spencer run in terms of how much gobbledygook are we getting. Like, even when we got something like, YEP and all that stuff, I don't feel like the story was tied down in the mechanics of how that worked. It was like, okay, this is nonsense, but this is moving us in X direction. And it was still fairly direct. It was like, this is the big bad guy. He's coming to kill you. Like, fine. As a result of my kind of like screaming to the heavens in anger about like how frustrated I found all of this gobbledygook, which I just don't think has a place in Spider-Man comics. I took it to the Slack and was like, hey, can anybody help, sort this out for me? I need to understand what is going on here. What are the stakes of this? How are these things all related? And my biggest question was like, how does the casket and the blight, which, like, I understand the casket is like a spell or something around Sidorak that keeps the blight out. What does that have to do with the Covenant? Like this issue does not draw that connection. And I'm like maybe I'm dumb and I missed something. And, a couple people in the Slack pushed me back to the first issue and I reread it. And that big spread that like explains like, what Doctor Strange found sets it all up. And as cleanly as I can put it, it's this. Doctor Strange was like mucking around in the cosmos and he discovered this thing called the Blight. And he knew it would be an unstoppable force. And so the only way he found to stop it was he went to Sidorak, and Sidorak could cast a spell called the casket that would repel the blight. But in order to do that, he wanted to establish a covenant with Doctor Strange, which would be this tournament between his children and whoever the champion is. And if he wins, then he gets to release the casket spell and allow the blight to consume the universe or whatever it's going to do. So it's basically like they're like competing to prevent him from releasing this blight that he's currently protecting against. Okay, that is what is going on. Here's the problem. In issue 1, you're throwing all of this gobbledygook at us. We're having to pick up so much stuff. Not only that, but like reads of Ragador and the spells Spider-Man's got to learn and all of that stuff. And when you're reading Doctor Strange comics or Doctor Strange stuff in a Spider-Man comic, you tend to like look at that stuff and go, what is the most important piece I need to pull from this? Because I can't hold on to every bit of this as sacred and something I need to keep in my mind for 7 issues as a core part of this thing, especially when everyone's telling me, oh no, the bad guy is Sidorak, he's going to destroy the planet, and this covenant and the Scions is the most important thing. So when you pull out something that hasn't been mentioned in 7 issues as the new big bad that you're like, oh, but we seeded it all before, it doesn't land because you included it in pages of gobbledygook. And it's the job of the writer to think of the reader and go, how do I elevate individual elements of this story to keep it fresh in the reader's mind so that they know it's important and they track it? And it's the job of the editor, if the writer's not doing that, to catch that and to facilitate good storytelling across these things. And instead, we're getting a shotgun spray of bullshit that we're supposed to be keeping up with. And then it goes, no, the pivotal thing was one of those pellets that got shot at your direction 7 issues ago.
I mean, I don't know how to reply to any of that because, I mean, you explained it better than I could have. Look, Dan, like, I've been saying from the get-go, I don't care about the stakes of this story. And you know, whether some of this was laid out in Amazing Spider-Man 61 or 62 or whatever or not is irrelevant to the fact that even if it, you know, it clearly was, but like, I don't care. Like,
yeah, no, I mean, what you care about is Peter.
Yeah, what I care about is what is Peter doing and how is he going to get himself out of this? And, you know, what we have instead done for the past 3 issues, and I'm counting like the Point Death one. I guess like the nihilism technically started 4 issues ago, I guess, but like, you know, I'm counting 3 full issues of this. What we've instead done is just like kind of like removed Peter and his stakes from the story and instead kind of like just focused on these mechanics and mythology and Doctor Strange exposition to move it along. And I'm back to just like, I don't care. I do not care. Like, what I don't know what they could possibly do at this point to make me care about this because, like, I don't know. Like, should Spider-Man be fighting demonic blight? I don't know. I don't think so. But, you know, like, it's on them to make it a compelling reason to make me care about it. And they haven't. So, you know, that I think trumps even any kind of sloppiness in editor's notes or referring back or anything. You know what I mean? Like they have failed at the basis premise of what a Spider-Man story should be, which is why should I care about this vis-a-vis Spider-Man? They have not established it. They just haven't. And I don't know. Like I'm so frustrated by it, Dan. I can't even like give honest well, it's honest criticism, but I can't even give elegant criticism of it because like I don't know if it's even worth elegant criticism because there's nothing elegant about any of this. It's just words on a page. It is word salad. We have gotten word salad comics right now.
I want to compare this comic to another book that I read this week. I don't know if it's for the first time or if it's been a long time since I've read it. And it's the Spider-Man issues, or just adjectiveless Spider-Man number 17. You may know it as the comic with Thanos on the cover holding Spider-Man in his hand. It's written by Ann Nocenti, and I was reading it to kind of get caught up on the books we're covering in season 7 of our show. And
lucky you.
I don't know if this book will ever get brought up in that conversation in any depth, but I found it to be a beautiful comic. And in it, Spider-Man dies trying to save a mother and child from an exploding refrigerator. And like the setup for that is fairly dumb. It's like he's trying to protect them from Freon with his body. But, you know, the first page is all the blueberry pie stuff that we've talked about in the past. Like he's got to get back to Aunt May, and he's got to, blah, 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 blah. And he's got barbecue sauce that he's carrying in his back pocket. And so when he crash lands after trying to protect the kids, you think he's bleeding out, but it's really just the barbecue sauce. But like the comic is about Peter dying and his soul going to the afterlife with these other, 2 people that he was trying to save and failing at, and encountering Thanos and death. And nothing about it should work as a Spider-Man comic. In fact, it explores a lot of the same themes that this like mega arc is trying to explore. I mean, this is a 12-part arc. It's almost Maximum Carnage in size. And I'll critique Maximum Carnage to the day I die. But in this one
That's
comic,
season 8, Dan.
yeah. In this one comic, you get this great like touch on like Peter and the idea of mortality and what he would trade to save other people's lives for his own, because his own life doesn't matter a whole much versus the lives of the people that he's trying to save. And it gets that all of that in a single issue. It's clean. It doesn't overspend its welcome, like explaining how he died and went to Thanos and death, and like what are the gems in Thanos' hand and how does that function, and is Peter able to trick him? It's just like a heartfelt tale about like Spider-Man's morality as channeled through, okay, we're going to use Thanos and death. Like, is that the most elegant Spider-Man way of doing it? Maybe not, but like Ann Nocenti hits it out of the park and makes it feel really exciting and natural to Spider-Man's world, because it's about the moral quandary that Spider-Man finds himself in about how, like, is he really in the place to trade one life for the other? Is his life worth more than 2 other people's lives as a superhero? It's compelling. It's over an issue. It's done and it's gone. And I'll always remember it. It really stuck with me. And, reading this issue and reading that issue in the same week, like, was painful. It like just the comparison. And I don't know if you know that issue like off the top of your head there, Mark, but it really stood out to me how 2 issues could try to do the same thing and one could fail so horribly at it.
It's been a minute since I've read it, but as you've talked about it, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That was a, I don't know if I'd call it a fun issue, but an effective issue. And I guess in simplest terms, what I would say is this is a comic right now that is just focused on all of the wrong things. It is obsessed in mechanics and mythology, and not in character or story. And we have seen this trend happen again and again and again over the last decade, especially as we enter like the 3rd and final act of a major story. And I don't know, Dan, like, this is a very rhetorical question, but like, when does this end? When do we land the plane? I mean, in all honesty, like, outside of like maybe 800, and going down swinging. I don't know when we have landed the plane in the Nick Lowe era, and I don't think we ever will. Outside, and I think the only reason why we landed that plane in 800 was Dan Slott, for all of the criticism he gets, and a lot of it is warranted. I'm not like removing him, removing him from any blame, but like I think him knowing that was his last story, he was like fighting by hook or by crook to land the plane, and he did. I thought that was one of his better stories, especially the latter half of his run. But I think especially if the authorship of Amazing Spider-Man is going to be this like transient relationship with people kind of coming in and coming out and rotating through or whatever, like it's just going to be a mess. And it all starts at the top of this book, which is the editor, which is Nick Lowe, and like let's just call a spade and call him by name. He's just does not know how to guide this book to a fruitful conclusion of an effective story. And I don't expect that to change until he is inevitably removed from this book, which I don't understand why he's been the same editor, why we've had the same editor on this book for the last 10 years and every other major title in Marvel has changed. And maybe this will eventually change in the next year or two. We'll see. We've heard rumors, but we've been hearing rumors for years now. But the thing is, he is just not the person to change this trend. And maybe the next person won't change this trend. Maybe this is what Spider-Man is at this point. But it doesn't change the fact that in the here and now, for the better part of 10 years, going back to the end of Superior Spider-Man, this is what we get in the third and final act of a Spider-Man story.
I just don't know who this comic is for. Like, it's not for Spider-Man fans. Maybe it's for X-Men fans. Like,
I don't think they care about that. I don't think they're like hopped up on the character and the interplay in this book.
Yeah, no. And like, then I have to ask myself, like, I mean, I was asked this in the Slack, which is like, why so cynical? And I'm like, I think this book has earned my cynicism, and I think I give it endless shots. Like just 2 issues ago, I was giving it an A-, because like
right.
I am, and you make fun of me, I am a fresh fool for Spider-Man. Like sell me a bridge with Spider-Man on it, I will buy it, but like, then I have to like look at this and I go, do I not get comics anymore? Do I not get what people are getting out of these? Am I missing what it takes to be a professional writer these days? Like, did the basic tenets of competent storytelling change and somehow you and I missed the memo on it? Like, if this is what counts, it's really like frightening. And, just to piggyback on your thing about this book being about like rules and all that stuff, it's also like, in addition to that, I would say the problem with Spider-Man comics is they are not about Peter Parker anymore. They are about Spider-Man, the franchise. And that's where you get things like a whole issue about how Norman sold Harry's soul to Mephisto when he was a kid. And again, back to my frustrations about the Gwen thing is like, I don't want a book that's just about Spider-Man. I want a book about Peter Parker, this character exploring new things. And the more we keep looking backwards at like the mythology of Spider-Man, the more we are trapped in endlessly eating our own tail. And that's not necessarily the problem with this individual comic, which is frankly not about Spider-Man at all, whether it's the franchise or the character, but like we've seen both of these. Like, I think we just said that like David Michelinie was the pedantic Spider-Man writer, but like this is on a whole other level, whether it's pedantic about the functions, like how a story, like how the pieces of magic function together, and whether that's the more important thing to get into than Spider-Man, but also like pedantically mining the history of Spider-Man so that there's no mystery left anymore. It's just, what more can we do with the past? But anyway, now I'm going down a whole other diatribe.
I mean, like, look, I think we ultimately feel the same thing about this comic right now. And when I say this comic, I don't just mean this issue. I mean the book itself. Whether the issue in my mind is tied into an obsession with the past. Like, I don't know if I feel that as strongly as you do, but like, if anything, I just, it's funny. Like, I feel like we, when stories were told that like pissed fans off, especially Spider-Man fans, like kind of like the classic comeback from a Dan Slott on social media was like, well, the one constant in comics is change. And I've kind of adopted that as an idea. Like look, like be open-minded, you know, be understanding of the fact that like in order to tell new stories, you have to expect status quos to change things and like look, I'm gonna like just call this out on its face, even though like over the years, and we're gonna have a whole episode in season 7 about this. Like, I feel like the only thing that this editorial office really wants to change is Peter and Mary Jane, because that's my issue with Spider-Man right now. Is like we don't actually want to change. They don't actually want to change anything. Like it is like how far can we push a story and a narrative without actually changing anything, and preserving some like kind of bastardized version of a status quo that like has been preserved for in amber for so long now. It's like now meaningless because like it's like we don't even like I don't think it's about obsession with the past. I think it's like trying to freeze 2007 and Joe Quesada and Carbonite and like preserve that while still trying to tell a new story around it. And it's just not working anymore. It hasn't been working for years now. And Nick Lowe seems to be the guy that is like, no, I can do it. And you're not. It's not good, man. You're not doing a good job. Or maybe, according to your bosses, you're doing a great job. But as a reader, it sucks. I'm sorry. It sucks. It's not like just like take the character somewhere different. Do something new. Have Peter be a different character at the end of a storyline. I kept saying 10 parts. This is a 12-part story. How is he not a different character at the end of this? Because he's not going to be. Spoiler alert. He's not going to be.
Yeah.
Like we're playing with nihilism, and he's gonna come back around at some point, and then it's gonna be the same thing we've been getting for the last 10 years. I don't know.
I wish that bothered me more because I think that is like kind of the standard, like he grew, but it was always so slow, like that growth and stuff like that. I just, for me, above it all is the execution is sloppy, like
sure.
If you could tell a story that would be, maybe a story is told by having a character change in some way, or present the illusion of change. Like at least give me the illusion of change, like,
sure.
But like for me, it's all down to execution. I think we got a change in the Zeb Wells run, which is what frustrated me so heavily about the word eventually when Mary Jane popped back in and Peter was like, I'll find my way to you eventually. And it's like, no, right. Would much rather see you find your way to Shea Markin at this point. Like right. That's the change that happened in the Zeb Wells run is Peter got over Mary Jane. Cool. Then pursue that. Like that was really there. It's just most people couldn't pick up on it because the execution of it was so terrible.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. Did he actually get over her? You know what I mean? Like
who could say given right. how poorly it was written?
But that's but you're right. But I think we're saying the same thing, just a different way. Where it's like, if it's poorly executed, then it's not actually change. It's not actually growth. It's not actually even if it's on the margins. It's not because it's not being executed in a way where it's manifesting in any kind of meaningful way. Like he you could have used this storyline as a way to progress things with Shea, but instead he's shacking up with Felicia and not feeling anything there either. So who cares? You know, like Shay is expendable. We understand that now. I don't think that should be the case, but that is clearly what this regime wants us to think. Like,
Whether she's expendable or not, they are not careful enough with her to
Right.
make me believe that they have their hearts fully in on this character.
Right.
And it's the same with, like, you know, MJ as Jackpot, like, or any of these changes of giving people a symbiote, which is like, you don't just make that many dramatic changes to these characters that willy-nilly unless you're not fully committed to the idea of it. Like,
Right.
if you wanted to make Mary Jane into a superhero, you would have spent like 50 issues slowly developing that if you really were committed to it as a full-throated idea.
Right.
And they're not. Like, you know,
No.
like it will be gone as soon as it was here.
Right. But change without commitment, and change without thought, and change without effort is not actually change. It's just, like you said, it's an illusion. And that's what I'm saying. Like, we are in this status quo of how do we feign change long enough to just get back to where we need to be.
And to sell a few action figures and variant covers.
Yeah, and you know, like, hey, you know, there's a new animated series, so make sure people are tuning in for that. And, you know, there's a Craven series, a Craven movie, so make sure people are watching, although I guess they don't really benefit from Sony. I don't know. But, like, but the point being, like, yes, it's about Spider-Man, the franchise, but, like, I don't even think it's about the past of the, it's just, it is so, like, Inception level navel gazing at this point that I don't even think they know what they want anymore.
Yeah.
This is like, just keep the franchise alive, keep it pumping, and, like, I don't know, like,
I bring up the navel gazy, like, backwards looking stuff because, like, you know, for every JMD copycat story that we get where we're rehashing, you know, Craven's Last Hunt for the upteenth time, or you went on a tirade about Ultimate Spider-Man, like, looking back on the Sinister Six,
right?
You know, just shortly ago. Like,
sure.
all these stories are just rehashing what came before instead of being inventive enough to come up with something new. And I think that's, like, ultimately where I got really disappointed in this story is it felt like an opportunity to do something new, and maybe it is. It's just doing it really poorly.
Yeah. All right. You want to give this thing a grade, Dan?
I was going to give this a D-. Well, at first I was going to give it an F. Then I was, like, going to give it a D- because I was, like, cooling on it. And now talking with you, I'm like, this is an F. This is bad Spider-Man comics.
I mean, I have been consistent in wanting to give this a D-. I still feel, I don't know, like, for whatever reason, like, the low point of my time on this book is still, you know, not only doing the gobbledygook of the end of the Spencer run, but, like,
issue 73, our rare F issue.
But relitigating, like, Sins Past of all storyline where I'm just like, I have, you know, like, Sins Past is an F to me, and it's like, I don't ever need to relive this book. And, like, not only are you making me relive this, but, like, you're trying to retcon it in a way where I can feel better about it, but, like, making it even more nonsensical. I don't think this is there. This is just real. But let it be said that this is as poor of a story as we have gotten in this run. It's just not, like, offensive level storytelling where I would give it an F. But, like, I'm like right there, I guess, is what I would say.
I just got fired up, but I'm sticking with my F.
You do you.
This is not a book about Peter Parker. It has no insight into that character. It makes me actively like him less. It focuses on the X-Men, but not in a particularly interesting way there. It highlights the problems with the story from the very get-go and what the editorial team has not been able to make coherent about what its stakes are. And it is doing a last-second twist on something that is completely rewriting our knowledge that we already didn't understand, and doesn't even resolve anything with Peter. We're going to be stuck in this bullshit for another issue.
maybe my cynicism is actually reigning supreme here, and I'm just saving that F for the next like 3 or 4 episodes here, Dan. Like,
Fair enough.
I'm
Fair
being
enough.
honest here. I don't. I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't actually think we're at rock bottom here.
Okay, well,
I still think there's room. my optimism is there's room to go lower. Good God, Dan. Good God.
This is, and again, I'm probably taking it. This is like objectively, like I can read this comic, I can recognize characters in this comic. You know, like I have read way worse comics than this, but this. Whatever sway we have, which is 0, let me add, like whatever it is, this is as emblematic as the problem of this editorial team as there is in a comic book. And I think it needs to be said that like we need to not accept the bottom of the barrel from this editorial team at Marvel any longer.
Hallelujah. Holy shit. Sorry.
All right, Mark, take us home on this very long episode.
It's that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of the support of our listeners on Patreon. For only $4.99 a month, the cost of a new comic, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews, the same week the comics release. We've got the first 4 episodes of Season 7 of our show already uploaded on the Patreon, plus, our Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man coverage, one batch at a time, 4 exclusive episodes there with Alex and I, and my upcoming and ongoing diary series about writing my book. They're called the Whatever a Spider Can Diaries, because my book's title is, at least for now, Whatever a Spider Can. So those are all there and very exciting and fun for you to listen to. So we hope you go check them out. But in the meantime, it's been a big week on the Patreon for us and everybody who supports our work. So we want to shout out our newest members, Jonathan Bentley Smith, Lee Reed, Karsten Odenthal, Patrick Claren, Christopher Luke, Matt, Matthew C. Hernandez, and even Paul. Heck, it might even be Paul Rabin. We don't know, but either way, thank you. Your contributions are even more valuable than those of Precious Symbology. And I got to think a lot of these people signed up for the new series we're doing. So I hope they're enjoying them, and I hope many of you listening decide to jump on that bandwagon as well.
Yeah, Dan, didn't we hit a milestone in Patreon subscribers through
Yeah,
all of
we
this?
crossed 200 Patreon subscribers for the first time, and I would like it to stay there and keep going up. So, in the era where Apple is screwing us, at least our listeners are showing up and supporting us on Patreon, and so I really appreciate that.
That is all we need to keep us warm at night, Dan. If you value Smarts Comics criticism and historical analysis, we hope you'll consider supporting us on Patreon like all of you awesome, friendly fans have done. What we do on the show is admittedly niche. Still, we feel that we offer valuable commentary and model fair methods of criticism. We swear this is fair methods, even if we kind of just went off on this issue. For a character and medium that rarely receives the kind of consideration we believe it deserves. So if that is valuable to you, we can only continue doing what we do with your support on the Patreon.
Yeah, I mean, what we do is niche, but maybe shouting about Spider-Man comics on the internet is not as niche as we think. But, we are here hopefully lending some heightened air to our screaming in some way. So, Mark, until we decide to abandon this podcast and let X-Men podcasters fill in, what's our motto?
With great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.
We are decidedly the non-mutant superhero podcast.
Always and forever.